Eber, I have to tell you, I feel like I've known you for years. What a gift that is. And we've never met.
Well, I feel like you're the gift. When I think back to when we first met, I don't remember a moment, but I just remember this person whom I've never met before sending me these encouraging cheerleading messages and inspirational messages. And it made me start to look at what you do and pay attention to your stuff and like be like, oh, I want to know her. I want to be in her orb because it's just all wonderful. And like you said, I feel like I've known you forever.
And that is one thing I want to share with our community because I believe that there are these beautiful little serendipitous moments that happen every day if you rise up off of your screen and the 86,000 things that you have on your task list that you think you can do in a day to lean into those gut whispers. So I saw the work that you were doing on Instagram. I think if I remember correctly, sometimes I just make stuff up, but I remember I think you did something with Jen Fisher or something from Deloitte, or you guys had synced up on something and it led me to your stuff. And I was like, oh my God, I love her. So I just wrote you a note. And then there became this sort of community over competition between you and I cheerleading each other on.
It probably was Jen. I've known Jen for years. I don't remember what that might
Yeah.
have been, but yeah. And it's funny because the benefit of the pandemic is that I met so many people all over the world on social media that I wouldn't have met otherwise because we're not going out to conferences, we're not
Yeah.
going around and networking the way we were in 2019. And as a result, you start to meet these incredible people. And so many of the people I met were fellow entrepreneurs and also fellow entrepreneurs that do the similar field of work that I do. And we've become the greatest supporters and cheerleaders of each other because there's plenty of work for everybody. Everyone has their own take on it. And no one knows better what you're going through than people who are living what you were living. And there's something just so refreshing about that. So I always find it funny when people are like trying to cover their work like the way you did in school and just are shut down because it's a missed opportunity for connection.
I love how you say that it's a missed opportunity for connection. Because isn't that what we're all so hungry for? Connection. And there's sort of this, like when you, at least I feel, and I'm curious your take on this, when you put out this aura and this energy of, I want to support you, I'm cheerleading you, this is hard shit we're going through, but we're doing it together. I don't know, gives you sort of like this faith, this courage that you can do it too through the power of connection. Have you felt that way?
Yeah, and it's almost I feel seen because
Mm.
social media is such a double-edged sword because you feel extremely vulnerable for everything you put out, as though every person is like analyzing every single piece of thing you do and consume. And no one is paying that much attention to you. But at the same time, even when you feel extremely exposed and under a magnifying glass, when someone does see you and acknowledge you, you're like, oh my gosh, you see me? And so it's a nice validation on those days that are hard and feeling exposing. And even if you're not in social media, you have moments that feel really vulnerable and exposed. And maybe that's in your personal life or your professional life or just anything. And so when someone sees you in those moments, it's just comforting of like, oh, I am noticed. Okay, that's nice.
Yeah. I love how you talked about the power of vulnerability because I'll tell you what, as someone who ran from her feelings for a long time into the things that made me comfortable. So, work emails, men, booze, food, you name it, anything that I would do not to feel. It's been so encouraging to put the mask down and be vulnerable and share that, although it is so scary. Have you felt that same way in your journey?
Yes, and so a lot of the work I do right now is helping different leaders, teams, and cultures learn how to use storytelling. And you cannot do storytelling without vulnerability, which is exactly what you're describing. As you've shared some of your experiences, you feel that vulnerability. And there's a neuroscience reason for that, and then there's the human reason, right? The neuroscience reason is you are feeling exposed. You're feeling like you are standing in front of a group that could attack you, and your brain releases that cortisol, and so you are chemically having these changes happen in your body when you're feeling vulnerable, because in those moments, your brain says, "Something's not right here. We're gonna have heightened focus, and I'm gonna give you these neurochemicals so that you can focus and be prepared to avoid something bad." So then we've got all these uncomfortable things. So when you're telling stories, when you're, like, standing on the edge of, "I wanna share this story," that's not oversharing, it's not private, but I wanna connect, I wanna share it. You feel all of that, and it's like your brain is saying, "Don't do it! It's it." And you know that on the other side, it is always worth it. There's always a payoff
Mm.
because as humans, we respond to vulnerability. I mean, why else do we love puppies and babies and all of those things? Like when you see someone that is being vulnerable, you have a natural chemical response to it. You release oxytocin because if you're being vulnerable with me and you're sharing things with me, my brain says, "Oh, she trusts me enough to share this. She feels like this is important for me to hear." And in turn, my brain gives me this boost of oxytocin, which allows us to feel this connection. And this is why we feel like we know people on social media that we've never met. And so all this stuff is happening chemically. And so in my work, I'm often helping people navigate that because it's very easy to shut down, but I live it too. Even though I know this, I even have a whole section on how do you deal with vulnerability. I still face it, and I'm incredibly private. One of the things I talk to people about is personal doesn't mean private.
Mm.
So you're always sharing personal stories of your perspective on something or your take on something, but it doesn't mean you're sharing your most private thing. And so I'm always navigating how do I bring my personal perspective to things without revealing something that feels too private, and how do I lean into it more?
Oh my God, I love that. I love how you said vulnerability doesn't need to be private, it's personal. Like, because I think we automatically go to, oh my God, I got to share my deepest, darkest secrets. And that's
Totally.
vulnerability, whereas can just be a personal story. I love that. Karen, I want to take our listeners through what the work that you are doing now as a chief storyteller. I love that. Take us through the journey that you've had, the curiosity that you've leaned into, those inner gut whispers that you've had enough courage to action on to get to where you are today and the work that you're doing.
Yeah, I like to say I've sat on both sides of the desk. So I've had a 20 plus year career in mostly the Fortune 500 realm. So first I was working for companies like Deloitte, HP, and General Electric. And then I went out on my own and I opened my own company and I switched sides on the desk, and I still work with big Fortune 500 companies. And it's always been in this space of helping people do their best work in an environment that doesn't suck,
Mm.
how to create a workplace where you've got healthy leaders that are creating an environment where people can come in and thrive and not feel so depleted or burnt out, and inspire along the way. My background is in instructional design, so I have this knack for understanding what is it that people need to be successful and how do you do that, how do you connect them to that in an interesting way. And so throughout my career, I've worked as a head of leadership development, a chief learning officer, a head of culture in these roles inside of companies where head of cultural, I had 90,000 employees in 150 countries. And I had to figure out how do you connect with each person? Because on something like culture, until you stop and think what it means to you, like it's just there. And so that's where I started to use storytelling, because when you're listening to a story, you can't help but think like, what would I do in that situation? What does that mean for me? And so I've spent my career doing that, reached a point where I decided I didn't want to do that inside a company anymore. And it just people say it's really courageous to open your own company. I actually felt like it would have been more courageous to take another role in a
Mm.
corporate position that I didn't really want.
Mm.
Instead, I thought, no, I want to go focus on the things I love to do and how to help other people do it. And that's when I opened my own company and have really leaned into this space and get to do really fun work with different people. So storytelling is a big piece of the work that I do now, of course, keynotes, but also different workshops and helping people learn how to hack the art of storytelling and understand what's happening in the brain. But what to do with what's happening in the brain when you're telling a story. And then I do a lot of C-suite workshops and retreats where we get in there and we tackle all those messy things everyone is avoiding and give them tools on how to have constructive conversations, how to build trust, how to navigate conflict, and then sometimes do advising on culture and leadership development.
Karen, you said something so great that I love. Well, you said a lot that was great, but I wrote this down because it triggered me. Environments that don't suck. Because
Mm.
I feel like we've just gotten used to in this corporate culture, in this hustle culture, that it sucks, it blows. I don't want to be here. I hate doing the work. It's just robotic. I'm going through the motions.
Yeah.
Right. And what would your guidance be to the person listening right now that is part of a team or even leading a team and you know that it sucks? Like everybody knows it, but you don't know how to change it. Like what's one micro step that they could do so it doesn't suck? So their whole day doesn't suck.
Yeah, let me just take you on a very brief tangent because
Yes.
work is work. And I like to admit to people, like, I have my own company. I design my work around what I love to do. And I have days that I don't want to do it. I have days where I'm tired and I want to break. And the thought of going and doing this stuff I love to do is like a lot because we are in this crazy, crazy time where what worked for us before for resilience isn't the same, or there's all of these external things happening that steal that resilience really quick. So I want to acknowledge like it's okay to have those moments. But when your ROI isn't happening, you're not getting that return on having more good days than bad, it's a problem because everyone's going to have a day where they just don't want to. But if you're finding that every day or the majority of your days are that, then it's a problem. And I do often get this question of, I'm on this toxic environment or this toxic team, what can I do? And so I love and hate that question. I love it because there's an interest in wanting to make it better. I hate it because it's a little bit like one person and a couple going to therapy and the other person doing nothing. Like one person can only do so much to affect change, and until the whole environment changes, not a lot can happen. So the first micro step I would say is 100% take care of yourself.
Mm.
There's a lot of things you'll see about get out of a toxic culture and quit your job. And I feel like none of those are helpful because it just insinuates that people have all this freedom in the world. And unfortunately, many people, especially in the US, are reliant on healthcare tied to employment and financial situations. And it's just not that easy. And I feel like that ends up making people feel bad if they're in a situation where they can't up and quit because majority of us are working and can't do that. So the best thing you can do is manage as much of yourself and health as you can, which is trying to minimize the burnout, trying to just a lot of the self-care, being really kind to yourself in the evenings and weekends and finding ways to rejuvenate and get yourself into nature and get yourself by water. And there's all of these things. But there's a point where it doesn't matter how much you do that. None of that's going to matter because you don't take a week off and then come right back in and to the same environment and everything's different. Um, the best thing that people can try is to ask questions because powerful question can open up a different dialogue. Even if you're on a team with a toxic leader, there's a way to do it that's not necessarily challenging the leader or even pointing fingers. So, a great example of this is let's say your team is trying to reach a decision on something. If you could ask the question, like, what would it look like if we disagreed with this? It's such a powerful question because it's
Mm.
not, "Do we disagree with this?" or "Who disagrees with this?" It's almost like I like to joke in therapy, they say, "Show me on the doll where it happened." Like, it's that because it allows for people to say, "Well, if we were going to disagree with this, we might think this," and you can take on this persona without anybody having to be in this place where fingers are pointed. And so there's questions like this that open up a different dialogue that you can try. Now, if it's a toxic leader, you might ask that question, and the leader might rain down thunder, and you might not ever be able to ask another one. But questions like that, that are open ended, that are exploring a different curiosity, a different idea. Where's their tension we should be paying attention to? That's another great one.
Mm.
It just can change a dialogue. So thoughtful questions can start to make a shift if people are open to receiving them.
Karen, I love that. I feel like I just went to church with you because you said two. I'm like, yes, preach it, Karen. You said two things that were so powerful that I loved. One, taking care of you. I feel like we are so quick to point the finger. It's the boss, it's the job, it's the colleagues, it's the clients, it's this environment. Well, my friend, the common denominator in all of it is you.
Yeah, and it could be all of those things, but you're still there for a reason, and so all you can do is, like, how do you bubbly up yourself?
Yes. And I found that, I'm curious if you felt this. When I started taking a few moments for me, so for instance, in the morning, instead of running and grabbing the phone and checking the emails and going to the social feeds and feeling like shit because I wasn't doing the glamorous things that everyone else was and frustrated with the emails, like I found I was just taking a few moments in the morning for me, pen to paper. Did did I change how I read the emails and how I showed up in the meetings? Do you have any practices, Karen, that you use so that you don't lose yourself in this movement that you're building and doing all the things and being all the things, like you're still being intentional with you?
I have a bunch, and it really depends on where my energy is and
Yeah.
what's happening. So I'm a big fan of walking in the woods. There's this forest bathing term that came from Japan in the 80s, which is that when you are moving in the woods where you see greens and blues and nature and all that, in 5 minutes you can change your blood flow, and in 20 minutes you can have a big impact. And so it's also where I often get a lot of ideas for storytelling. So if you follow me on social media, you'll see a lot of posts in the forest and stuff, and that's because I'm trying to get out and do thinking and breathe. And so if I am hitting a moment in my day where I'm just not making progress and I can't, I go do that. I also try to plan them and schedule them. That's probably the biggest one. That is I know that it's going to be an immediate reset for me. Another one, as silly as this sounds, is I organize my week with Google Keep, which is checklist. So I have in there what is happening each day and my top priorities. And then I have a place where I can move them if I didn't get to them. And so when I finish each day, I go in and I look at what didn't I get to? What do I have to get to tomorrow? And I make it really clear, what do I need to do when I come in? Because the crazier it gets when you sit
Mm.
down to do something, your brain is still spinning and you're trying to figure out what to do. And so little things like that, even on a Friday, prepping the week ahead, like I always know when I come in what I have to focus on instead of getting in and going, okay, what have we got today? But that little shift makes a difference because then your morning can start, like you said, with mindset for the day and what you want to do.
I love that. I love that. And I think there is something, we all know these simple things that we should do, but there's something like messed up about us, Karen, right? Where we think if it's so simple, then we can't, then that can't be it. So then we just don't do it. Like how you said, I spend some time in nature.
You know, the
I,
biggest shift I
yeah.
experienced as an entrepreneur, when I was in corporate, I was working hybrid or virtual. And you go to the grocery store during the day, right? You have a 90-minute window. Great. I'm going to run to the store. I'm going to grab what I need. That's going to make my life easier later. I'm still working all the hours. That's not an issue. Work doesn't care. But I would go to the grocery store and I would immediately feel guilty. And I'd be like checking my phone every 10 seconds of like, oh gosh, oh, I'm not on my computer. Oh my God, dumbest. 'Cause no one cared. It was all on myself. But when I started on my own, that went away. And there's no reason for it to have been there in the first place. But these games that we play with ourselves or the stories we tell ourselves aren't always true. And so I think another big one is really asking yourself, like, what is true? What do you know to really be true? Because so often we are convincing ourselves that we have to check our email at 6 in the morning when we get up when that's not really true.
That's powerful. That is powerful. There have been so many of my girlfriends, people that I've spoken with, myself included, hand raised, who set these unrealistic parameters for myself. No one was telling me to do these things, but I felt like I had to do them. And Karen, that to me goes back to, you said something else that was so powerful that I wrote down about asking questions. To your point, we make up these stories and then personally and professionally, and then we never ask ourselves if it's true, or we never even ask the other person. So I love how you gave examples of the questions to start to ask. So Karen, I want to ask you, I'm a huge believer that our world has turned robotic. Like we text, we Teams chat, we are in the emails, like we surveys. How about we just be human? And there's this power, like everyone wants to feel human connection. It's who we are, but we've never been taught how to do that in corporate America. So what's your take on how to make our teams, how to be more connected as humans?
Yeah, this is why I focus on storytelling because it is all about connection and communication and being memorable. So the approach I take to storytelling is really digging into the neuroscience of it, but not in a sciencey way, because most people don't want to sit through science class. But what I do is I explain it and then help you see what to do with it. And I have what I call the five factory settings of the brain. And these are the way your brain is going to naturally respond when it's listening to information, communications, or a story. And so the first one is relevant here, which is you have those nights where you put on a show or a movie that you've seen before because you're like, I just don't want to think.
Yeah.
I just want something easy and I want my brain to relax. That's because if you're putting on something new or different or complicated, like your brain has to pay attention and you have to focus. And the same thing happens in meetings throughout the day and connection. And it's because the first factory setting is that our brains are lazy. The
Mhm.
number one goal of your brain is to get you through the day alive. And when it does that, it's like, high five, you did it. Do it again tomorrow. And by the way, just do exactly what you did today because that worked. Let's not go crazy. So your brain is using 20% of your body's whole calories, the most of any organ, and it always wants to have this surplus. It wants to hoard them because it needs to have calories to allow your body to function, make predictions and all of that. And it's looking for moments to be lazy because it wants to make sure there's a surplus. If it bankrupts of calories, you have a big problem. So these moments where our brains drift off, the presentation that's really boring, the leader that's going line by line through data, the conversation that you can't help it. You want to check your phone in the middle of. It's your brain. It's a natural thing. The way around it is you've got to get the brain to spend calories, which means you have to be putting in detail. You have to be dynamic. You have to be authentic, right? If the person can predict what you're going to say or how you're going to say it, or they think you're incredibly boring, that's just, the range is going to be like, peace out. This is like 30 seconds or a minute or 10 minutes, and I can go take a breather. But if you're using dynamic language or you're just being a really, you're embodying yourself, it starts to be different. And think about where most meetings start, especially as we've been in a world of virtual and on camera. So many people just log on and they're like, hey,
Mhm.
yeah, here. And we just jump in and it's okay. Sometimes time is like that, but you can still be dynamic in your phrases or the examples or the metaphors, or there's little things you can do that make the person's brain go, oh, I didn't expect that. Oh, that's interesting. And so connection is just that of we slide, just like you said, into robot mode because we're back to back to back to back to back to back. And our brains are glazing over because we're on the screen and everybody's in this little box, and my brain just wants to go take a break. And so you've got to force the brain to spend some calories.
I love that. I love that. So what would an example be of switching it up? Okay, you're on this standing Zoom call or team call or whatever format it is with your team. You know everybody's going through the motions, whether you're a leader or a contributor or you're just a team member. How can they spice it up? Can you give us an example?
Yeah, this is the one that's always awkward for people, but works. So there's all of these studies that say if you start with social talk before you dive in, there's better connection, rapport. And when you're back to back, that's really hard. But every call I'm on with clients, they're like 2, 3, 4 minutes late. And there's always someone you're
Yeah.
on with. And so sharing like a random thing. So for example, I have 2 cats, they are incredibly naughty, and one of my cats got on the couch and started meowing at me to cover him up with the blanket so he could be tucked in and take his nap. Like, that's a 15-second, like, "Ugh, let me tell you what my cat just did this morning." That's not private, that's a personal thing. It's a, like, it's a space filler while we're waiting. Now, if there's a call of 20 people, you can't necessarily do that, but it's a whole lot more interesting than talking about the weather. If you're presenting, don't drone into what you're doing. Just think like, what is a word I can use that's different or unique? Like one of my friends said to me, sometimes I try to think of like the most appropriate business language and phrases I can say. And then other times I'm just me. And I'm like, just be you. No one needs to hear culture eats strategy for breakfast again, because these are just tropes that people say over and over and over. And your brain is like, peace out. I'm going to take a nap right now because I've heard this. There's nothing interesting here. So you just wanna, it could be as simple as you're working in a word that is unique. You're dropping in the 10-second story about your weirdo cat, whatever, that it just starts to change a different discussion.
I love that. And it's easy. It's easy.
It
It's
is
your life.
easy.
It's you. It's easy.
However, what I would say is I'm also an introvert, so sometimes thinking of these things in the moment is a little hard. So I keep one or two of these, like my cat, that is like, okay, this is an easy space filler. Or I go in knowing I'm going to need to do this, and it just helps me have that muscle ready.
Love that. You know what I started to do, which has been such a game changer for me, Karen? I am like, oh, and why didn't I ever think of this before? I start telling the truth. When people say to me, "How are you?" Instead of doing the good, I mean, it all depends on your audience, right? It all
Yeah,
depends.
sure.
But instead of going to the "I'm good, I'm fine, it's okay," I'll do to what's going on. Like, oh man, I am tired. Are you tired? Like, I just feel like it builds this sort of connection versus the facade language.
Yeah, and there's a couple reasons for that, because if I say, "How are you doing?" in my brain, I'm like, "Oh, Megan's gonna say I'm fine. I'm fine." And I've
Yeah.
already checked out because my brain is lazy and I don't care. We're just doing polite pleasantries. We don't pay attention. It's like, I'm always guilty of this. Like if you're taking the taxi to the airport or something for a flight, and they're like, "Okay, have a good flight." And you're like, "You too." You get in these modes of patterns of language that don't make any sense. But if you do say something that is real unexpected, not like, then it forces, huh? Okay, say more. Because also, now my brain is responding to you of, "Oh, she just shared something and she was a little bit vulnerable," and I'm getting just a little oxytocin spike in there, and so it makes a big difference.
I love that. Karen, I want to ask you this. So I was having a conversation with a girlfriend, a new friend of mine yesterday, and we were talking about speaking of vulnerability, she was sharing with me her journey and her life, as I think happens to so many of us women, men too, but a lot of times it happens to women that our lives become about taking care of everyone else. So her life was taking care of her daughters, taking care of her job, making sure that everyone was taken care of. And she's like, now, Meg, here I am in my 50s and I'm finally ready to take care of me. I'm ready to find my purpose, but I don't know where the hell to start. So, for our listener, regardless of what age you're in, it's not an age thing. It's listening to that gut whisper of, I want to find my purpose. I know that I am meant to do more, but that's such a scary question. Like, what is one thing that they can do to start to have the courage to lean into that?
I'm gonna give you 2 things. The first one is, it is scary because you get in your head and you start analyzing and spinning and
Yes.
spinning and spinning, and we're the masters of that. So instead of being in your head, go for a really long walk. I mean, like, a 2-hour walk or hike where you're gonna be tired after, because
Mm.
that's gonna slow down your ability to spin in your head, and certain things may pop up on the hike. For some people, listening to music or a podcast during it works. For me, I do, and amazingly, always the right thing plays at the moment I need to hear it. For other people, they don't need that. But that, like, exhaust yourself and see what pops up is one thing I would say of get out of your head. But the flip side of that is start to notice what excites you and what gives you joy, like Marie Kondo said, because it's those little things that make a difference. So, for example, I have told stories throughout my career, but it never occurred to me to show others until people started to come to me saying, "Well, how are you doing that? And how are you doing this?" And then I started breaking it down, and it was like, "Oh, I wouldn't have gone into this path thinking this is what I would do, but you start to pay attention to those bright spots and things that make you feel energized, and it can have a huge difference. So the combination of the two gives you some things to start to play with.
I love how you talked about like what I got from that, Karen, was the power of silence. Like I think it's a Rumi quote or something that says, "There's so much in silence," or you can find what you're looking for in the silence. I love that. You have this great quote on your website, and you had me at intentional, and I want to ask you about it. It says,
Yeah.
"Great workplaces are the result of intentional shaping of behaviors." Oh, I loved that. Talk to us about what that means.
Yeah. Too many workplaces are the result of unintentional behavior, right? People are just doing whatever. They're crazy, they're back to back, and they're just acting and they're not thinking about how do I want to show up or what do we really value? Or if I'm a leader, how am I landing on someone else? And so intentional is being aware of how you want people to experience you or how you want people to
Mm.
experience the culture. So I play the flute, and I was playing in a, retirement home, like a nursing home a few years ago, pre-COVID. It was a holiday concert, and we're in the main dining room where all the residents eat, and they were there listening to us, and some had walkers and some had oxygen tanks, and there are these tables that have little flowers on them, and along the perimeter of the room is exercise equipment, and it's neat, but it's not perfectly stacked, like, you can tell they use it. And I'm changing out my sheet music for the next song, and I look up, and in the center of the room was this disco ball, and it was gleaming, and it had strobe lights that hit it, and I was like, yeah, that is amazing. And in that moment, I was like, if I am ever in a nursing home, it has to have a disco ball because you know that they like have dances on a Saturday night where they're probably playing like Glenn Miller and someone's DJing like this one's Ladies' Choice. And what I got from that disco ball in the room I was in was the true experience of being there, not what was on their website, and you hear all these horror stories about retirement homes and how
Yeah.
people are treated in them. But here, people weren't trapped in their rooms. They were encouraged to live and enjoy music and be out and be social and have community. And like that whole experience told me so much about what they value and what they do. And so that is the intentional expression of stuff. If you're not
Mm.
intentional, people experience all sorts of things. And so a lot of the work I do with leaders and teams is being really clear on what is it that they want people to experience and what are the disco balls, not what's on your website, but what are those moments that everyone experiences. And I use the word shaping because you're never done. Like so many people think, oh, we're going to do our annual culture survey and here are the results. We heard you. And you're not done. You were never done with culture or trust or so many of these things. They are reinforced and encouraged or discouraged through the behaviors every day. And so, if you're not clear about what you want, what you truly value, what that looks like day to day, then that shows up in your experience. And so, the two together makes a powerful combination.
I love that. And I love that story. Way to go, chief storyteller. I love that. And I wish someone would have had these conversations with me when I was in my corporate career and I was a leader, which I never understood, right? Like how we do this. So I was really good at sales. And then I
Mhm.
started moving up the ladder and it took me away from sales, which was the thing that I was good at. And I was living in spreadsheets, which I hated.
Right.
But that was air quote the proverbial going up the ladder. And I
Right.
was so focused on the tasks, getting the tasks done, living by the task, getting the report in on time that I completely lost touch of the human component.
But it also sounds like you weren't encouraged or reinforced, right?
No.
Because your leader should have been coming and asking you those types of questions too. Because there's a support, I don't necessarily blame leaders for where we are today. I do think we have a big leadership problem. But I think that people don't know what to do different. And so often
Yes.
your leadership is what you've experienced or what's been role modeled for you. And so if your company isn't helping you see that or experience that different, or your leaders aren't asking you questions, then that's what happens. I mean, so many conversations I have with C-suite teams are, tell me what you talk about in your meetings. And it's always like, well, financials,
Mhm.
important, absolutely. Operations, again, important, absolutely. But when are you talking about the cultural aspects of it? Because a healthy environment has a culture that creates an environment that develops and supports the talent that can deliver the business results. You don't get the business results without the right talent, and you don't get the right talent without the right culture. And all three are reliant on each other. Therefore, all three should be discussed in the C suite meetings. But so often, those very things that can make the difference in the calories per hour that people give or how much impact they have is dropped off. And that's all the culture stuff or conversations about the leaders. And so a lot of it always comes down to what's paid attention to, what's reinforced and encouraged, what's developed. And so many companies just put all of their time and investment in operations and financials or sales and you cannot deliver without those for sure. But if you want to be able to create this ongoing engine that builds a pipeline of leaders that can make a difference going forward and save yourself time and money and frustration and lost costs, then you've got to pay attention to those other things.
I love that. Karen, for the leader listening right now that was like me and thinks to themselves, holy shit, yeah, like I'm just focused on the task. I know we have to change, but I'm not getting that from my leadership, but yet I am responsible for a team or even I am a part of a team. Like how can they start to change that if they're not getting it from the leadership above, from the C-suite?
I'm going to give them two questions to
Yeah.
use, and these questions require courage. Um, but hang with me because it actually, well, there's a little bit of upfront energy. It saves time in the end. So if you ask the teams that you lead either of these two questions of where is there attention that I should be paying attention to, and what is one thing that I need to hear but is difficult for me to hear, or what is one thing that, that I should know. It's being vulnerable to say, "Help me see what I'm not seeing. Tell me what I'm paying attention to." And so that takes courage because you might hear things you don't wanna hear, right? "Tell me one thing I don't wanna hear." First, gotta create an environment that feels safe and trusting enough for people to do that. That is of utmost importance because otherwise you're not gonna get anywhere. But if you're genuinely curious and you're creating this place where people feel like they can share that and not be blamed, then you're gonna hear really helpful things. And while that feels like a big energy spend upfront, what you're actually doing is releasing the pressure valve because whether you ask this or not, those things are felt and experienced. And these are the things that people are talking about, and these are the things that fester and create a toxic environment or cause people to leave. And by asking and understanding and being curious and trying to see what adjustments can be made, you are solving and addressing longer term problems.
Mm. Preach it to me, Karen. I love that because it hits the nail on the head. Back to what you talked about earlier. Ask questions, be human. Boom.
Yeah, what I find people are afraid of is that your average leader is really afraid to have an emotional discussion, and
Yeah.
an emotional meaning entering a conversation that they don't know where it's going to go. So often people avoid the difficult conversations because if I have to give you feedback and I don't know where it's going to go, like, oh my gosh, what if Mike gets emotional? Oh my gosh. And they freak out and they avoid it. Well, so what if you get emotional? We're human. We actually decide through emotions. We can't take emotions out of work. And it's wrong to say that. But we're not equipping leaders on how do you have these conversations and how do you navigate this. And so often, I find that it's often a tendency with teams that are male dominated. Like there's this fear. I don't want to talk about feelings.
Yeah.
Okay, don't talk about feelings. Talk about problems. Like whether you're saying I feel or not, these things are happening. And so the thought is that a silent team is a healthy team, but a silent team is not a healthy team. A silent team, by the way, is never silent because every person is waging in their head the calculation, their own algorithm of, is it worth me speaking up? Can I even say something? Am I going to get blamed?
Mm.
Do I care? Is she going to speak up? Like there's a constant running dialogue in the brain of everyone. But a silent team means I don't feel comfortable sharing. I'm afraid I'm going to be blamed. It's not worth the hit that I'm going to take based on past experiences. And so if your team isn't having conversation or debate or constructive dialogue, that's a challenge. And it doesn't mean you have to debate every single thing, but if you're not inviting that and you're never asking the questions about what's going on, there's a lot happening under the surface that could be problematic. And so the fear is always, oh my gosh, if we open that Pandora's box, what are we going to do? Well, if you don't open it, this boil is gonna fester, then what do you do? And so, I always find it's a little bit of pressure release valve, then you can get into the habit of shaping, and it's no longer this heavy thing. First few times you do it, you're forming some new muscles, you're creating an environment that feels different, and so that's a little harder, but once you do it and you get in the rhythm of it, you're solving these problems that much quicker, and people are bringing them forward, and they're not becoming these things that are toxic seeds that are planted.
Oh, Karen, I could listen to you all damn day. I am so excited that you have had enough courage to put your intellectual property, all of your beautiful words to pen to paper. You have a book coming out. Tell us about this baby.
I'm so excited about this book. So it's called The Perfect Story: How to Tell Stories That Inform, Influence, and Inspire. And it's
Mm,
meant for anyone that wants to learn how to tell stories, or if you tell stories, it's meant to help give you some additional things that can help deepen your expertise. And it does get into the science of storytelling, not in a sciencey way, it's in a very fun way. But it gives you these things that it's evolving the conversation on storytelling because there's a lot of things that touch on the science, but this looks at some different science as well, because neuroscience is fascinating and evolves every year. And it looks at how do you then take these things and build them into your story so the brain is going to be more engaged and responsive. And so it takes you step by step through the process of figuring out your audience and having an endless toolkit of story ideas and building them out and
mm.
engaging all the senses and emotions and how you can play with sequencing, how you tell stories with data, which is a whole other thing. And it even gets into avoiding mistakes and manipulation and vulnerability. And one of the things that I love is I interview different people that tell stories in their professional life. So the TED Radio Hour podcast host, a former creative director at Pixar who worked on Finding Nemo and Monsters Inc. Um, a neuroscientist, an improv comedian, the co-founder of Sundance, an executive producer of The Moth. So people that do this in so many different ways because I wanted to pepper in these little vignettes that show there's so many different ways you can do this. And so these interviews end each chapter, and they're just the coolest walk in this person's world. Like if you were next to them at a dinner party and you would be asking them questions, that's the type of things you get. So you get to hear what the executive producer at the Moth thinks about when she's working with people, or you get to hear what they thought about when they were building Finding Nemo to create this world that, while is based on fish and ocean and animation, also feels like family relationships and stuff. So that's also a such a fun part of this book. And I'm in this awkward period of like, I just don't want to bring it out to people, but we have a couple months left to go.
I love how well, first of all, I love how you talked about I took all of these great ideas from these amazing humans, and you feel like you're sitting at a dinner party with them. I think those are some of the best nuggets. And I love how you talked about the moth. Just a couple months ago, I found out about the moth. Will you share for our listeners who might not be familiar on the moth what it is, the community, what they do?
Yeah, the Moth is a storytelling organization, although they actually say they're a listening organization. They've been around about 20 years, and I am blanking on the original founder, but the name The Moth came from a moth attracted to the light. And this idea that I believe actually in the South it started where you sit on the front porch and you tell stories late into the night, and the moth is attracted to the flame. And so or the light. And so it's like the story is the thing we're attracted to. And so the Moth created this organization where, in different stages all around the world, and in a podcast and in video, people come up and tell personal stories. And they are they're usually about under 10 minutes, and they are entertaining as anything. They're just it's like peak storytelling. They do have competitions called story slams where in different cities, often fairly regularly, like once a month, they'll have a story slam. People drop their name into a hat and they're drawn, they get up and tell a story, and then there's a competition and it can go all around. But if you're interested in learning more, check out there's a podcast called Them Off. Um, there's like just pick any of them. They're all so fascinating and cool.
That. And I'll link that, guys, in the show notes so you can just click right on that. And speaking of linking in the show notes, I know we have a little bit to go for the book, but if anyone is salivating like I am and they can't wait to get their hands on it, how can we find out when the book is coming out? How can we stay connected with you to get more of your nuggets?
Yes, so my website's the easiest way, which is my name, KarenEber.com. There's a book page there where you can sign up, and not only will you hear what's coming and, you can go behind the scenes because 'cause I've been trying to share what it's like to write a book, what it's like to be published by a big publisher, which is so fascinating until you do it. There's so many pieces of it you don't realize, like, I have to audition for my own audiobook, if you can believe that.
Know that?
Yeah, yeah. So that type of stuff is there. So, you can sign up and I'll be sharing more information about the book, pre-orders, giveaways, all of that. I also have a brain food blog where I tried to practice what I preach, and every other week I'm sharing a newsletter post that is story based and it's always on storytelling, leadership, culture, teaming, and it's giving these tips of what are things you can actually do and try. So if you're a leader that is really busy and heads down and just wants to have something free delivered to your inbox that gives you that little nudge of, are you doing this? Or maybe you want to try this, then Brain Foods for you. You can also go look at the archives. There's hundreds of posts there that have different topics that you could search by keyword whenever you've got a situation that you're facing.
Wonderful, guys. And I'm going to link that all in the show notes so you can sign up and follow Karen because she is just a world of wisdom. And Karen, I have to tell you, thank you so much for being here today. I knew I was going to love you. I knew we were going to have a great time. And you have just delivered so many beautiful nuggets and easy ways. Like, I love how you gave examples. I love how you gave these easy things with these things that we struggle with to bring humanity into the way that we work and doing so in such a beautifully authentic, caring way. And I have to thank you for having enough courage to lean into those gut whispers, to spread your movement, keep sharing your words, being vulnerable yourself, and creating this movement. It's beautiful. I'm so proud to know you, and I'm so proud to support you and have you as a member of our tribe. Thank you.
Well, thanks to you for creating this community of positivity, yet reality and pragmaticism. Like so many people tilt one way and not the other, and you are just a joy and a light. Thank you.